Hi everyone, welcome to the Legal Intake and Triage webinar. Thank you all for coming along. I'm so glad to be sharing this use case with you. By way of introduction, my name is Minwoo Yim, and I am one of the customer success and delivery leads here at Checkbox, specializing in the in-house legal space. For those of you who might be hearing about Checkbox for the first time, I'll briefly give an introduction to who we are and what we do. We're a technology company, and we've built a platform that is the leading drag and drop platform in the market, specializing in automation and workflow. Now, what this means is we empower business users, such as lawyers, without a technical background, to build their own automated and digitized tools. And this is to solve for things like document creation, which you can see in our NDA webinar, triage, which you'll see today, as well as approval processes and assessments, which you can see in our next webinar, so keep your eyes peeled for that. We are trusted globally by the best. We work across many different verticals and industries, across many different functions, and from organizations both small and large. In today's webinar, what we'll be doing is focusing on the legal intake and triage use case. Now, having said that, Checkbox can be applied to more than just legal intake and triage, and it can be more than just the legal function. So if you're not from the legal space, this webinar will still be relevant to you. You can see how the decision kind of flow applies to use case. We've certainly seen triage in procurement, compliance, and so we can chat about other use cases we're automating as well. Now, before we jump into the webinar, a few housekeeping rules. There is a Q&A button in this webinar, so feel free to submit your questions at any point. I'll try to go through the questions within half an hour, but if we run out of time, I will get back to you via email after this webinar. So let's start with why is triage such an important concept? Why is this something that we would even consider? Well, to answer this, we need to look at the way that business users typically interact with lawyers within a corporate environment and some of the challenges that might arise from this interaction. So let's go ahead and imagine for a second that we're actually a business user within the HR team and that would like some advice around, let's say, an employment agreement, or employee agreement, relating to an existing employee. Now, typically what we'll do is we'll reach out and first talk to someone within the legal team, either by phone or email, or even catching them in the hallway. And we know it's not the most efficient thing to do, but I know that if I catch someone in legal, they'll know how to solve the problem, or at least point me to someone else who can help me solve the problem. Now, often this approach is taken because I, as a business user, find it difficult in finding appropriate legal resources, whether that be legal content written up and stored, or digitized tools that can help me with my requests. I just find it easier to talk directly to a lawyer. Now, if my request is fairly complex, let's say, for instance, the employee agreement is, involving a senior stakeholder, it's a fairly bespoke agreement, I feel unsure about how to actually frame my question I'm trying to ask. And again, it just gives me comfort in talking directly to a lawyer to work these things out. For my basic requests, they can be quite repetitive and predictable in nature because it's part of what our business unit does, but sometimes it's just part of the process to rope in legal. And at other times, it's not documented very well on how I actually am to find things, whether they be templates, documents, or how to carry out certain protocols. And again, I'll lean on my legal team to help me out here. Overall, I feel like all legal requests as a business user typically take longer than ideal, typically take a normal amount of time to be dealt with and to be answered. So what are some examples of these legal requests? Well, these legal requests would typically be things like requests for documents to be generated, templates to be provided, that's a fairly normal one, like the NDA or supply agreements. Documents to be reviewed, when you have a supply agreement where the supplier pushes back on a specific clause, legal needs to review. Things like general legal advice and know-how, who can sign this document or who needs to sign this document. And finally, even questions like company secretarial matters, which seems to be a pretty common use case for our smaller corporate counsel teams. That's a fairly common question. Now, this list you see here is certainly not exhaustive by any means. It's just an example to help us understand the type of work that's coming in from business users to legal. And then on the other side of the coin, the type of pain points that a lawyer such as yourself may generally feel when involved in this process. Now, the general sentiment across the board is that lawyers feel that there is a constant feeling that there's too much work. And now, although the volume of work coming into a specific legal practice area can be pretty flux, pretty cyclical, say for instance, employment laws, we talked earlier, if you're hiring or firing people, it'll change. The amount of legal work coming into the legal function is actually a product of the business size and the activity of the business, more so than the size of the legal team. So we've seen anywhere between one lawyer servicing 100, 200, 300 employees. Now, what will happen is this leads to a feeling that legal service requests are often not distributed evenly nor assigned efficiently. So legal requests are often typically assigned to specific practice areas, and even within those practice areas, you might have found specific individuals who specialize in that type of matter typically take on that work, and that leads to sort of an uneven distribution of work. And that's further compounded by cyclical factors like end of financial year, end of the calendar year. Now, of this huge volume of work, because there isn't a way to actually prioritize it, lawyers generally feel that they spend quite a lot of their time solving low-value tasks from the business. And when solving for these low-value tasks, they also feel it's quite difficult to locate the appropriate legal resources. So just to give you a sense of how big this problem actually is, we actually went out and took a survey of our existing customer base, taking an example of a small, a medium, and a large corporate counsel team across different industries. And you can see that the high volume of work or high volume of legal service requests is a pretty consistent theme across the board. It ranges anywhere between 1,000 on the low end, all the way up to 60,000 per year, which is quite a lot of requests. And if you multiply that by the number of hours that each request will take, multiply that by the number of lawyers, you can certainly see the impact that it starts to have on the legal function as a whole. So to summarize the problems, the business users feel they have trouble finding the appropriate legal resources to address their legal service requests, and lawyers feel that there's a high volume of legal service requests and not enough time to address them. So how do we bring these two worlds together and solve both problems? Well, the legal intake and triage tool is an automated solution, and it is designed to solve these two problems by aggregating legal service requests from business users and then appropriately prioritizing and triaging them out to lawyers. So now that we've covered it conceptually, we've kind of given you what it does and the problems it's solving, let's actually have a look at what this might look like as a business user and as a lawyer involved in that process after an implementation of a tool like this. So let's go ahead and jump in. So let's again pretend that we are for a moment a business user looking to, again, within the HR team, submit through a legal service request. I might jump onto my company portal, as you can see here. And you can see that icon there with the two sort of instant messaging bubbles, legal requests. And so as a user, I log into Internet Portal. I go ahead and click on the legal request tool. And what will happen as the business user is that I will be directed to the landing page of the triage tool. I'll just bring that in over here. Nice to see. And what the triage tool will do is it will give us some expectation and boundaries. It'll explain to us what the tool will cover in terms of scope. And when we click on next, it already summarizes for us the series of topics that we as a business user can ask legal. You can see here on the left-hand side, you have different business units. That makes it super easy. If I know which business unit I'm part of, I can just ask questions pertaining to that. And even it has taken even common legal service requests like contracts and agreements, generate, review, execute, things like that. So it's been distilled. And to help me frame my decision, on the right-hand side, we have what we call tips that actually put in information that help me as a business user determine what type of legal service request I'm actually asking for. So let's go ahead and pretend for a moment that we've got a data breach within our team. So let's go ahead and choose a data breach. and just say I sent an email to the wrong person. And when I click on next, I'm automatically routed as a business user to another automated tool. In this case, it's called the Notifiable Data Breach tool, which helps me determine, using backend logic, the scale and impact of that particular data breach. And so we'll do things like capture information related to the breach, as well as my personal details to help me assess that. Now, this is done end-to-end without ever involving a lawyer. And so if it's a basic legal request, it's below a risk threshold, it will allow the user, the business users, to self-serve. But we'll also have a look at a situation where we would like legal to be roped into high risk or high priority work. So let's jump back to our triage tool again. And this time, let's say we want to generate a contract. And you'll notice that as we choose contract, the decision tree-like nature of the tool asks us to clarify the type of contract that we're looking to generate. So in this case, let's say NDA. Now, the moment I click NDA, I'm actually routed out to another automated solution called the NDA Generator. And we're going to go through a sort of an example where we might want to rope in a lawyer as part of this process. So again, here we have a landing page for the NDA tool. Let's go ahead and say no here. And what it'll ask us to do is provide basic details pertaining to the counterparty. What Checkbox allows you to do is actually integrate into the ABN directory, which allows you to do things like look up into the counterparty's name. So for instance here, we've got this company name. We'll just do Kamikaze Fishing and Company Trust for short. I did spend 10 minutes last night looking this up. And we'll do Evan Wong here as the authorized representative, as well as Evan's email. His entrepreneurial pursuits no bounds. Inspection of fishing hooks. So we're now here at a point where we have to detail the agreement's background. And now it is an NDA, but let's imagine for a moment that this NDA is going along with, let's say, another agreement, let's say an M&A deal. And let's say the threshold value that we would like to rope in legal is $1 million. If the M&A deal is worth more than $1 million, we'd like to rope in legal. So let's just do $1.5 million. That makes it a little bit easier. And let's say this is a new external client. Now, what it's actually doing on the back end is prioritizing this particular request based on the factors that I, as a business user, have input. For example, in this case, it's a M&A deal, it's worth $1.5 million, and it's for a new external client. And immediately, the tool will know that this is a high priority task and therefore needs to be seen by a lawyer immediately. And what we'll actually do is we'll click on next, and I'll show you what happens here is it'll be sent out as an email to the lawyer for them to review that particular contract. So that's been sent off here, and I will just open up my email for you to see. Now, while that's loading, conversely, if it's a low value task and it's below the threshold, there's no obvious factors that would need legal to step in, we can just allow the business users to self-serve that document and therefore save legal's time in having to be part of that process. And what you can see in the email tab, let's just drag that over here and loads up, is an automatic notification that's been sent to the legal team. And it's told us that we're being assigned Evan Wong's NDA, in this case, because it's above $1 million. And it's also attached the NDA for us to review. Now, of course, we could also attach the M&A deal, which would make a lot of sense in this case. But you can see that for thresholds that are exceeded, or in other words, high value work, they're directed to the legal team as a first priority. And for low threshold tasks, they're allowing the business user to actually self-serve those tools. In addition to that, I'll just quickly show you the breakdown that a legal function might be able to see. And so what you're seeing before you is sort of the what we call native dashboard that provides some slice and dice of the data as part of this tool. So you can see here a breakdown of all the triage topics that were provided by the business users. And I assure you most of this is myself. So you have contract agreement, privacy data breach. And you also have contract types. So in this case, you have mostly NDAs, fair enough. And you can also see all the different types of requests that are occurring concurrently, that have been completed or are in progress. So what does this look like under the hood? How are lawyers empowered to build out something like this? Well, let me just jump back to the studio here. And the studio is our kind of author view of the studio, or under the hood view. And what you can see before you is the triage tool, starting from left here and moving all the way to the right, spreading out in a tree-like manner into its corresponding practice areas and business units. So you can see procurement, you can see here contracts and agreement. So let's go ahead and let's say we want to add a very simple yes or no question at the beginning of this tool. And let's say the question is something like, is the legal service request an urgent request? Let's go ahead and drag in a yes and no question. And let's just say urgent legal service request. Now, of course, in practice, we wouldn't do this because business users tend to say everything's urgent, but just for the sake of demonstration. So no urgent. If we were to say no to this question as a business user, we would just simply continue on into the rest of the tool. But if we were to say yes, we could link it out to our other tools, other automated solutions. We could email the legal team inbox, or even link out to things like matter management system. So let's go ahead and have a look at how this page looks from a business user's perspective. So again, we have our landing page. When I click on start, there you go. We have urgent legal service request embedded as part of this tool. And if I click on no, it'll forward me to the rest of the triage tool. Whereas if I say yes, we haven't implemented anything here, but we could link it out to other, we could link it out to a matter management system to then process and prioritize our work. So now that we've seen the tool and what it can become, how do we actually get started? Well, what we notice is that this process requires quite a few different practice areas to come together and collaborate. And so we recommend assigning somebody within your organization to be an operational lead or project lead who can then collaborate with these practice leads to put together the content. You then also need to identify who those leads are. And very often you'll see in smaller corporate counsel teams, those leads will kind of cover multiple business units and areas. So that's fine as well. Now, the next step for each practice lead is to then map out the inputs. So what are the common requests that come into that particular practice area? So identify in broad strokes, general legal service requests, and then go into further specificity around what those requests are actually asking for. So I'll give you an example. We saw earlier with contracts and agreements, you could break that down into NDA, procurement agreement, or you could take a different approach and say, contract becomes, are you looking for an agreement to be generated? Are you looking for an agreement to be reviewed? And then further split that up into the types of agreements. So that's the first half of the tree, which is the input side. The latter half of the tree is the output side, and practice leads also need to identify where each legal request should go. So typically we break this down into three categories. Firstly, we have internal knowledge base. So that's where business users can ascertain outcomes themselves. So they might read a document and say, hey, I can make this decision myself. Two, there's other automation tools. So this is typically for things like generation, review, execution, and workflow of documents. You would have seen that as I walk through the NDA tool. And the third one is, good old face-to-face contact with a lawyer. How can I actually access them? So we've seen this either as a direct access to a centralized email address or to matter management systems where it's then prioritized to specific roles. Now, for teams who've implemented this, we've seen quite a few benefits. The first one is an immediate visualization of legal service requests in aggregate form. So, it's quite a common theme where, corporate legal teams just don't know how many requests they have coming through the door. And that's a pretty normal sentiment, normal theme. But this visibility that the tool has enabled then allows or has allowed legal teams to better understand the type of work that is coming in from the business. And this is particularly helpful for determining where to best allocate lawyers. So for example, one practice area might need more lawyers closer to the end of financial year or end of the calendar year. We can track this and then allocate lawyers accordingly. Thirdly, it's enabled lawyers to be more efficient and allow them to focus and prioritize high-value work, which is obviously great for everyone. And finally, and most importantly, it's reduced turnaround time for basic legal service requests for business users by allowing them to self-serve and directing them to existing content and tools, whilst also reducing the turnaround time for priority tasks by filtering these out, distilling them, and forwarding them directly to lawyers, ensuring that these high priority work tasks are not lost in the volume of requests coming in from business users. And we did run some numbers, and we measured that in a conservative situation, say we save 2 hours of lawyer time over a given working year. For a team of anywhere between 5 and 100 lawyers, we'd be looking at typically something between $30,000 to nearly $600,000 worth of savings every single year. That's a conservative situation with a below average wage rate. It's still a pretty staggering statistic to see, to know that a tool like this can easily make an impact from day one. So what are the implementation considerations when thinking about Triage tool and general automation tools? Before I get started, I want to give a big thank you to Denise Doyle, who's a transformation lead and a friend of Checkbox. And thank you so much for sharing your insights, Denise. We really do appreciate you. Now, firstly, when thinking about implementation, you have to recognize that there are different ways. This is a very different way of processing legal requests for both lawyers and for business users. For business users, they're going to be going from talking directly to a lawyer to talking to a tool, a fully digitized tool. And to make that transition, they need to be assured of the benefits of using something like this. Namely, that there's going to be a reduction in legal turnaround time for basic and complex requests. Similarly, lawyers need to be assured of the same thing. They're going to be going from interfacing directly with business users to interfacing with prioritization tool or a ticketing tool. And so they need to be sort of change managed through that. Secondly, business users need to be communicated to and must accept ownership over any risk that comes from using these automated tools or any advice or knowledge that they've actually acted upon. And so it's just an acknowledgement that that risk is being transferred from legal to business. That's a very normal part of this transformation process. Typically, what is being self-served is low risk anyway. It's just a reassurance that it is not going to have too much of an impact, legally speaking. Thirdly, you might want to consider how work is allocated across the legal function. Is it to assign specific lawyers to practice areas with clear boundaries, or is it more of a satellite approach where lawyers will have a core competency like M&A and then have sort of like a satellite competency that they can shift to when work escalates in other parts of the business? Lastly, it's important to consider how this tool sits with the rest of the technology stack. And we've seen integrations with matter management systems, which is the ticketed approach to work distribution. We've seen document management systems for the storage of generated legal documents, as well as data visualization platforms to visualize where the work is coming from, who's asking it, and where can we potentially automate in the future. Now, with that said, we might wrap up here. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for coming along to this webinar. It was fantastic sharing the legal intake and triage use case with you. My contact details are there on the screen. If you'd like to reach out to me directly and talk about anything automation related or non-automation related, I'm down for a chat. So you can find me there on LinkedIn and email. And by coming along to this webinar, you are eligible for our free trial offer. So Checkbox has a free trial offer at the moment. We will email you details around how you can access that in the follow-up email. And actually, one of the customization guides that we provide as part of that trial is the legal intake and triage use case. so you can build out and deploy your very own triage tool within the 30 days. For those of you who answered that you're interested in approval workflows, we have another webinar coming up around all things document execution related and how we manage that using workflow in Checkbox. So stick around and keep your eyes peeled for that. And we will see you at the next webinar. We might do a bit of Q&A before we wrap up here. We've got one question. It says, how does prioritization work in this tool? I might quickly answer this one. So with the triage tool, there's sort of two ways that we say prioritization works. One is called passive and the other one's called active prioritization. So with passive prioritization, the way it works is the natural tree-like nature of the triage tool means that basic legal requests are automatically filtered out and sent to self-service tools and content. And for more complex legal service requests, those go immediately, as you saw before, as an email or as an alert to the legal team. And so by the very nature of the tool itself, we call this almost like a passive prioritization. Now, there is a layer on top of that called active prioritization. It's where you can build in or bake in logic to weigh some of those different decisions or outcomes to differentiate their importance. So for instance, you might say contract reviews for your organization is a higher priority than company secretarial matters. And so you could bake in the logic to have that weighted accordingly. Similarly, matter management system integration that I mentioned earlier will handle that for you and have their own weighted prioritization mechanisms. I hope that was helpful. So mindful that the time is wrapping up very quickly. And so I want to again thank you for coming along to this. Please keep your eyes peeled for our next webinar. We hope to see you there. And again, thank you so much for coming along. Bye, guys.